بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
سبحانك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك فلك الحمد حتى ترضى ولك الحمد إذا رضيت ولك الحمد بعد الرضا. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في كل وقت وحيد وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في المدى الأعلى إلى يوم الدين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد حتى تلك الأرض ومن عليها أنت خير الوارثين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. One of the Imams, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with him, he mentions that the one whose beginning is not bearing in effort, his end shall not be illumination. من لم يحرق بدايته لم يشرق نهايته. The one whose beginning is not bearing endeavor and struggle and toil, that their end shall not be illumination. And likewise, one of the great Imams, Ibn Ata'illah al-Iskandari, he says, al-bidayat, majallat, and nihayat. And that the beginnings are also the manifestations at the end. When we make mention of that, inshallah ta'ala, I think as the university welcomes some new students onto this, inshallah ta'ala, in the community of Muslims. But what's important, inshallah ta'ala, is that one should start as they intend to end. And what we hope, inshallah ta'ala, as we hear the introduction, inshallah ta'ala, that we should be people of intention. And the intention that we hold for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the beginning of the affair, inshallah ta'ala, should see as well in the end of the affair. There's a tradition, inshallah ta'ala, just to try and speak about the title, inshallah ta'ala, that there's a tradition that we know in Sahih Muslim, a very important tradition as well as a famous tradition. The tradition of Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam, Gabriel alayhi salam. And the tradition obviously clarifies the nature of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, deen of Allah. The tradition is Sahih of Imam Muslim. And it's a tradition where Gabriel alayhi salam becomes unto the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, as related by Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab. And he asks the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam a series of questions, 5 questions to be exact. And all of those questions are very important as it relates to the fabric of our religion, the fabric of the deen of Islam. Because we know at the end of the tradition, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he asked, Ya Umar, atadri man as-sa'il, or Umar, do you know who the questioner was? To which Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu replied, Allahu wa rasuluhu a'lam. Allah and His Messenger knows best. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Innahu Jibreel ataakum yu'allimukum deenakum. It was Gabriel who came to teach you your deen, your religion. And the tradition which formed the basis of our conversation tonight, inshallah ta'ala, as was related by Imam al-Tirmidhi in the chapter of the Fitan, Kitab al-Fitan. Imam al-Tirmidhi radiallahu ta'ala relates on the authority of Sayyidina Anas Ibn Malik radiallahu ta'ala an, sayati ala nas zamanun, that they will come upon humanity a time, as-sabiru ala dini qabd al-jamar. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the one who exercises patience upon his religion is similar to the one who holds on to a piece of burning coal, the Prophet ﷺ said. So in order to understand something about that tradition, we have to also understand something about the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in what will it that will render the deen somewhat difficult for people to actually hold on in a specific time that comes upon humanity. But likewise also, what is the deen? And that's very, very important. And what is the deen that the Prophet ﷺ was sent with by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to clarify unto humanity a deen that ultimately is clear. As the Prophet ﷺ said, تَرَبْتُكُمْ عَلَى مَحِجَّةِ الْبَيْضَاءِ لَيْلُهَا كَنَّهَارُهَا لَا يَزِيغُ عَنْهَا إِلَّا هَالِكٌ. That I've left you upon a very clear path, a clear way. It's night, it's like it's day. There's no obscurity. Nobody strays from except someone who strays unto destruction. The Prophet ﷺ, the deen is crystal clear, there's no humul, there's no obscurity therein. And likewise we also know the hadith that was related in the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari, where the Prophet ﷺ said, ad-deen yusr, that the religion is also yusr, it's facilitation, it's ease. But likewise, there's no difficulty inside of the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is why the fuqaha, the people, the jurists of the religion, when they speak about the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in it being an eternal reality, infinite reality, timeless reality, is that it's salih likulli zaman wal makan. That it's what it is, it is facilitated, or it's suitable for every time as well as every single place. So when the Prophet ﷺ said, يَأْتِي عَلَى نَاسِ زَمَانٍ, that there will come upon human beings a time in which what the Prophet ﷺ is alluding to is that somehow it is not suitable for that specific time. And the reality here is not the suitability of the religion, but something that's gone wrong inside the depths of the human being that renders him somewhat estranged from Deen al-Fitra, from the primordial way that the Prophet himself sallallahu alayhi wa sallam came in. The hadith of Gabriel alayhi salam, the first three questions, which are the essence of the religion, whereas the latter two questions, they relate to time and place. Where is the religion anchored? The end of time. As the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in the Sahih, he made mention that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said that I was sent and me and the hour are like this. And he raised his two fingers and placed his two fingers like this, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. What does it mean? Traditionally, the ulama made mention of that the manifestation of the Prophet ﷺ ushered in the end of time. There's no space between the Prophet ﷺ and the fall of the impending hour, the impending moment. After traditional understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentioned inside the Quran, يَسَأَلُونَكَ عَنِ السَّاعَةِ, they ask you about the end of time, the sa'ah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then instructs the Prophet ﷺ, أَنْتَ مِنْ ذِكْرَاهَا, that you are from the evident signs of that hour. And that was the ulama that concurred upon, that the manifestation of the great Prophet himself, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, ushers in the final epoch of man, the final epoch of man. But the ulama, because we've had 1400 years that has transpired since the manifestation of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, they've come with an understanding that is adaq, that is more precise about the actual ishara, the symbolism of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. I.e., if we take this finger as the manifestation of the human being from the time of Sayyidina Adam until the manifestation of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in terms of time, all that remains is this, the distance between this until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings forth that impending moment. So we're in the midst of it. And when we look at the great ulama of Islam, that they spoke about the impending hour, because the tradition is this burning coal or cinder, holding on to a cinder, as it relates to the impending hour, the difficulties that afflict the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ at the end of time. When they speak about the most difficult century of the believers, we're in the midst of it, the 15th century of the Muslim. And there's never been an alim in the history of Islam that has placed a date upon the end of the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, who's gone beyond the 15th century of the Muslims, the century in which we now reside in. And that has very, very important ramifications for each and every single one of us, especially our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our relationship with the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the central topic of our discussion. That the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes for regulation, it comes to regulate the human being, to align the human being with a higher order, a celestial order, and that celestial order ultimately as was crafted and created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. An order that is in absolute submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, an absolute submission to those who are sent on behalf of He Jalla fil Ula. And that is why we see Gabriel alayhi salam, the greatest manifestation of the celestial order, Gabriel, Jibreel, the extreme power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who descends upon the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam 124,000 times according to our tradition. And he is the first teacher of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, despite the fact that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, bil ijma', according to the consensus of our ummah, is greater in rank than the great Gabriel Shadidul Quwa, the one of extreme powers, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls him inside of the Quran. He asked the Prophet ﷺ three very important questions, and every single question relates to the regulation of the human being in accordance with this celestial and divine order. The human being is a juxtaposition of three different modalities or three different dimensions. Human being, no doubt, is a physical creature, physical, and we live in a physical realm. And the unfortunate nature of most of the people at the end of time, and that does not exclude the believers at the end of time, that the physical dimension becomes more important than dimensions that were more important amongst the ancients. What about the intellectual realm, the rational realm of the human being? Yeah, if we looked at those, the ancient order of Europe, the Greeks, when they would speak about the definition of the human being, they would call him al-hayawan al-aqil. They would call him the rational animal. They would say the human being brings definition to himself by virtue of his intellect, by virtue of his rationale, that they place the rational dimension as primary in the definition of who man is. But when the Muslims, Ahlul Islam, those who la yantiqun an al-hawa, those who do not speak of their own desire, but they take it from the asl, they take it from the mashrab, wa huwa Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, their tongue is aligned to his tongue sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. When they define the human being, they define the human being by virtue of his rahab, by virtue of his spiritual reality, by virtue of the fact that he's a soul, he is a spiritual being before he is rational and before he is physical. Gabriel alayhi salam in this great tradition which speaks to us 22 days before the passing of the Prophet ﷺ. That's why it has primacy inside of the religion. It's not a type of tradition that you will later speak about, that it was somehow mansukh, it was somehow abrogated by later traditions. It's 22 days before the flight of the Messenger ﷺ unto Rafiq al-A'la. And when Gabriel asks the questions, we have to look beyond the questions. But what is Gabriel actually asking the Messenger of Allah ﷺ? And it's about how do we regulate the human being such that the deen, whenever it descends, whenever the laws manifest, as it pertains to any of the realms of the human being, that the being finds himself sabir lillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he finds himself a being of patience for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, such that la yataza'za', such that no time that afflicts him renders in somebody of weak faith, of weak practice, of weak attachment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The deen acts as it's supposed to act inside the reality of that human being in that time and in that place. When Gabriel asked about Islam, Akhbirni an al-Islam, tell me about Islam, Gabriel is asking here about the regulation of the physical dimension of the human being. Whenever you hear about the word Islam used inside the prophecy, Islam always relates to physical actions that manifest upon the being of man, physical action. Islam does not relate to the mind of the human being. And Islam does not relate, per se, to the actual spirit of the human being. And that's what the ulama say, that these terms, Islam, Iman, and Ihsan, إِذَا افترقوا اجتمعوا إِذَا اجتمعوا افترقوا, that when they're used together, they mean different things. But when they're used in isolation, they can be synonyms. So here, Gabriel alayhi salam is using them inside of the same breath, which means iftaraku, which means Islam is not Iman and Iman is not Ihsan. So Islam in this sense, it's about the regulation of our being, physical being, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the form of prayer, salah. And that's why the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, I've been commanded to prostrate upon 7. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, physical realities. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is speaking about. Or when the Prophet ﷺ speaks about Sawm, Siyam, and we just came from the great month of Ramadan, but likewise we head towards 90 great days, 90 of the Ayyam Allah, the Hilm bi Ayyamillah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, remind them of the days of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the days where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's barakah is evident. And as we approach within this up and coming week, the great month of Dhul Qa'dah, and then we go to the month of Dhul Hijjah, and then we go to Muharram, these 3 months in Al-Bukhari, the Prophet ﷺ spoke about these being months that have been sanctified by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the day Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the heavens and the earth. Days of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala desires to see us inside of acts, physical acts that regulate our being to the wants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or when the Prophet speaks about that physical wealth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us it as a trust, so that when you're in al-fuqara, so that it's returned back to those who have a right over it, as designated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, physical realities. Or when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks of physical movement beyond the sphere the actual sphere in which we exist, the actual place in which we exist, unto a blessed place, the first place that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed for the worshipper in Jalla Jalaluhu wa ta'ala inside of what? On planet Earth. These are physical realities. Islam is about submission of the physical being, such that we become people who are secure, safe from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. From the meaning of Islam, Islam means to be placed inside of a sphere of security. وَلَا مَلْجَأَ إِلَّا إِلَيْهِ, as the Prophet ﷺ said, there is no asylum, security إِلَّا إِلَيْهِ, except unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why the Messenger of Allah ﷺ would say, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika minka. Oh Allah, I take refuge in you, from you. The Prophet ﷺ would say, how then do we secure our physical being? By being scorched from divine fire. How then do we secure that? Through the regulation of our being unto that which is the want of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's an important aspect of Islam, and it's the most important aspect of Islam for physical beings, especially inside of the dunya, because in the time of fitan, as the word tradition alludes to, time of fitan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has two types of tribulation that He unleashes onto the human being. For amongst the tribulation that come forth from the acts and deeds of man in and of himself, and that we contravene the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in order to purify us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places us inside of a sphere of a type of punishment, a type of chastisement, and chaos that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reaps onto what? Into the human domain. That on the basis of our deeds. But the beauty of that type of punishment is that we have the ability to stave it off. How? By regulation of our physical, by rendering ourselves inside of the sphere of what? Of divine law or prophetic law, such that we stave off any type of punishment that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala desires for man. But as we move towards the last epoch, the essence of the last epoch of the human being, which manifests with the manifestation of Sayyidina Isa ibn Maryam, Jesus the son of Mary, is a different type of fitna. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned inside the Quran, ittaqu fitna allati la tusibanna man zalama minkum khassa. Fear, a fitna, a tribulation that does not only afflict those who are amongst you who oppress. It's not about oppressors, but it's about the age in which you live. It comes by virtue of time. Nobody can circumvent it. Even if every single person upon the face of the earth was from the people of ta'ah, the people of obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the fitna would still descend. And that's when you speak about the nature of the deen becoming difficult for somebody to hold on to. That's a fitna that descends by the nature of the time. Not necessarily, although there is a connection, but not necessarily by nature of the people who live inside of that time. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for safety and security. But likewise, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam also answers the question that relates to the human rationale of iman. Tell me about faith. About faith. And faith, iman, is a synonym linguistically of Islam. Both of them relate to security and safety, as we mentioned from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So how then do we ensure that our worldview, our psyche, our rationale, our intellect likewise is safe from divine scorching or divine punishment? And likewise, that's about regulation of it in accordance to the want of the divine. And that's Banu Alat, as the Prophet al-Bukhari said about the prophets, that they come with one faith, one aqidah. Faith is not on a shifting continuum, as opposed to the physical dimension of the human being and the physical regulation. That's on a shifting continuum. Laws change from prophet to prophet, and laws even change inside of the sphere of the teachings of one prophet. And the law of Islam, it changed, underwent radical change inside of the life and times of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as it manifests inside of time and place, it's also subject to types of change. The religion is of two types, what they call in terms of the law. It's thawabit or mutaghayyirat. It is thawabit, i.e. things that are unchangeable, immutable realities. They cannot change according to time and place. But there's also mutaghayyirat. Mutaghayyirat are things that change in accordance to the time and place in which a human being lives in. And Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he makes mention in his I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in an Rabbil Alameen, signatures on behalf of the Lord of the world. He said, anyone who doesn't understand the changing nature of the religion in accordance to time and place, that they've not understood the religion in and of itself. In this, we understand the difference between the faith that we hold and the practice, the physical practice that we've been in charge with. Practice can shift, can change. And it needs to shift and change, especially as we approach times in which shift and change is essential in our mafhum of religion. People who hold on to a different order, they're going to find that holding on to that different order is like holding on to a cinder. When the people of the end of time manifest, Jesus, the son of Mary alayhi salam, who comes with taghyirat of the deen of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, but that has been prescribed by the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the hadith in al-Bukhari, لَيَنْزِلَنَّ عِيسَى بْنَ مَرْيَمَ, that Jesus, son of Mary, when he descends, يَقْسِرُ السَّلِيمِ, he will smash, break all crosses, وَيَقْتُلُ الْخَنْزِيرِ, and he will kill every single pig on the face of the earth. And there are different types of pigs. But likewise also said Isa ibn Maryam will also yada' al-jizya. He will also abolish, abrogate any type of jizya, that the tax that those who live inside the polity of Islam who are not Muslim are afforded to pay by the law of the land. That's Dalika Sayyid Isa Maryam. That's Jesus, the son of Mary alayhi salam. And his people, those who manifest at the end of time, are awaiting the manifestation of Jesus, son of Mary alayhi salam, in the tradition that was raised by Abu Nu'aym and raised by Imam al-Bayhaqi rahimahullah ta'ala, that Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala ba'atha Sa'ad, that he sent Sayyidina Sa'ad ibn Uhayb ibn Malik radiallahu ta'ala of the 10 lords of the companions, 10 guaranteed paradise. He sends him to Hilwan al-Iraq. He sends him to Iraq to open up Iraq. And it's our great man that we should thank for the open up of Iraq, the open up Mawra and Nahar. All those lands that lie beyond the great river of Iraq, that's the great Imam from the Sahaba, Sayyidina Sa'ad ibn Malik radiallahu ta'ala anhu wa arda, is the one who opened up them great lands. Sayyidina Sa'ad radiallahu ta'ala anhu, in order to open up this specific part of Iraq, on the instruction of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, this after the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he sends a companion, his name is Nadla ibn Muawiyah, al-Ansari radiallahu ta'ala anhu, in order to actually take this actual hayy, Hilwan, from Iraq. And Nadla takes the actual hayy, conquered 400 faris, 400 knights, they conquer this specific part of Iraq, and thereafter they take all of the booty, spoils of war, to the height of the mountain which is inside of Iraq at Hilwan. He says when he reaches the top of the mountain, time for salah. So Sayyidina Nadla himself, who is the actual commander of that sortie of that group, on behalf of Sayyidina Sa'ad radiallahu ta'ala, he begins to call the adhan. Ashab Dhikr begins to call the adhan. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And as he calls the adhan, Allahu Akbar, he hears a voice emanate from without, from God. You can't see the person who's speaking. Yani kabbar takbira. That you've made a great declaration of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's greatness. When he says Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And then when he says Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. When he says I bear witness there is no deity but Allah. He hears a voice, the same voice, speak back to him. He said, وَبِذَلِكَ شَهِدَ أَهْلُ السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. He said, and that has been witnessed by the inhabitants of the heavens, the celestial as well as the terrestrial, the heavens and earth. And then he said, Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah in the adhan. Then he hears the voice likewise say, Nabiyyan bu'ith. A prophet who has been sent, la nabiyya ba'da. And there's no prophet after him. And then when he said, Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala salah, then likewise he says, Tuba. He hears a voice say, Tuba. Glad tidings of paradise. لمن مشى إليها وواظب عليها, the one who goes unto it and maintains it. And there is a حي على الفلاح, حي على الفلاح, يعني come unto success. He said unto Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam al-baqa li ummatihi, that which is eternal for his ummah. And here when he finishes the adhan, Sayyidina Nadla radiallahu ta'ala begins to address, Men anta, who are you? And then the voice, then a person appears, and he's in two thawbs, thawbun khalq, like what somebody would wear for Hajj. He has two thawbs, khalq, that they're rough and they're made out of wool. And then he says, Ana wafdullah, I'm the delegation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa ana wafd nabiyyihi, and I am the delegation of his Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Wa wafd Umar ibn al-Khattab, and I am the wafd, the delegation of Umar ibn al-Khattab. He said, Wa ana, he said, I am Wasi Isa ibn Maryam. I am the wasi, which is the legacy of Jesus, the son of Mary alayhi salam. And his name is Zuraib ibn al-Barthamla. Zuraib ibn al-Barthamla. And he said, Askarni Isa ibn Maryam alayhi salam, that Jesus, the son of Mary alayhi salam,
he was the one, Jesus, who sent me to the mountains of Helwan, the time of Shaykh Ibrahim Osi, sent me, he's a disciple of Jesus, sent me to the mountains. And this is something that we should understand from our deen. If we just study the great surah that we should have recited today, Surah Al-Kahf, and we look at the story of the boys of Surah Al-Kahf, the Fatayan, those young ones, Surah Al-Kahf, who were they and why did they become Muslim? That they become Muslim due to the da'wah of Sayyidina Isa ibn Maryam, that Jesus alayhi salam and his great mother, the Siddiqa Maryam alayhi salam, they had sent messengers to various parts of the world to await the manifestation of the final Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And manuscripts that we see to this day manifest, send messengers to what? To España, to Andalus, send messengers to North Africa, messengers to Egypt, and many messengers, the majority of them, into what? Into the Arabian Peninsula of itself, as well as to Anatolia, to Old Turkey, where the reality of Ashab al-Kahf. When we read the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, we see many of these people or their students manifest just before the coming of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. They're known as the Hunafa. So from our tradition, some of the ulama even say that they're even disciples of Jesus. As an example, whom? Salman al-Farisi, radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda, in a position that he is an actual disciple of Jesus. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, rahimahullah ta'ala, mentioned inside of his Isaba. This is a disciple of Jesus, Zhain, a disciple of Jesus inside the mountains of Iraq. And he said that Jesus was the one who sent me to these mountains to await his manifestation. His manifestation meaning Jesus' own manifestation at the end of time. The fact that I have missed the Prophet himself, I confirm that he doesn't meet the Messenger of Allah, أقري على عمر ibn al-Khattab as-salam. Give my salams to Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab. He says, and then he said, and tell Umar ibn al-Khattab, Saddidu wa qaribu, to bring the ranks together, the believers together, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks inside the Surah Al-Saf. And these are essential things that are essential for people at the end of time, that the sufuf, what they call tawheed al-sufuf, that the ranks of the believers are brought together. And all of these type of schisms that are crept inside of the ummah of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, that serve to separate, not to bring together, like the verses we just heard. وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, commandment of Allah Jalla al-Ula, for us not to separate. Saddidu wa qaribu. He says to Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, to not let him tell Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, brings the ranks together. And he says, because at al-harab, it was going to be time for everybody to flee with his religion when signs manifest inside of the ummah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. From the signs he makes mention, إِذَا يَكْتَفِيَ الرِّجَالِ بِالرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاء بِالنِّسَاءِ. He speaks about the issues of homosexuality. When man finds solace in men, faqat, or women find solace in women, faqat. Yani men after men and women after women. Men taking on the attributes of women in order to bring about that type of foul union, as the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, al-mukhannafina min al-rijal wa mutarajjilat min al-nisa. That the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, men who behave like women and women who behave like men. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the one who said, ma bu'ithtu la'anan, I was not sent as one who curses. So when he curses, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, it's a dire reality that a human being has now characterized himself with. And what's even more foul, as the hadith says, is that when Zhain says, when people see ma'aruf and they don't enjoy it, and we know the law and we don't teach the law and preach the law, we don't enjoin people to embody the law. When people see munkar, when they see that which contravenes the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَلَا يُنْكِرُونَهَا, and they're not of those who are going to speak out against, and the Ummah has developed cute silence in the face of this tyranny that manifests upon the face of the earth. Tyranny at every single level, contraventions of the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Perhaps you see a human being from amongst the ummah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam speak in defense of laws of kufr, speak in defense of international laws of kufr, or national laws of kufr, or regional laws of kufr, but you'll find them silent in terms of upholding the law of Allah Jalla al-Ula. فَإِنَّ تَذْهَبُونَ وَمَنْ تَلْقُونَ, where are you going? Who will you meet? If you're going to meet on the other side of the veil, Kamil, then that's one thing. If you're going to meet on the other side of the veil, the head of the United Nations or the head of America, that's one thing. But if you meet Allah, then fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as it relates to his religion. Fear him subhanahu wa ta'ala. Many things he mentioned that you find that the elders will pay no compassion to the youngsters, and the youngsters will show no respect to the elders. You find people taking on ansab, taking on names that are not their own, relating themselves to families, lineages blessed or lineages other than blessed that are not their own. He begins to mention various things. He mentions he mentions women's liberation, women's lib, where women now begin to try to occupy the sphere of the reality of men. This is what Zhain mentioned inside the hadith. Things that are from the signs of the end of time. Haram. He said at that point in time, it's time to flee. Flee with your religion. He said, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. What we see in our day and age, he said, send this to Umar ibn al-Khattab. فَغَابَ عَنَّا. Zhain then disappears. And then saying another informs Sa'd. Sa'd informs Umar ibn al-Khattab. Umar ibn al-Khattab says, هُوَ الَّذِي أَخْبَرَنَا عَنْهُ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. That's the one the Prophet ﷺ informed us about. And the Prophet saying, Umar ibn al-Khattab says, Sir, مع المهاجرين والأنصار. He says, scour the entire Iraq, the mountains of Iraq, for that individual. Go and find him. Saying Sa'd ibn Malik takes 4,000 soldiers into the mountains of Iraq, and all they do is call the adhan, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Because that's what brought the manifestation of the great being. Calling the adhan for 40 days, they never find Sayyidina Zhain, radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. The reality is not about finding Sayyidina Zhain, because the one who finds Isa ibn Maryam will find Sayyidina Zhain at the end of time, hatman, no doubt about that. But the issue is about the signs that he spoke about, as we endeavor to ensure that if that time comes, we're people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We can't be people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The physical is not regulated. No matter what anybody says. There may be people who claim, who may call to some type of higher order religion, but as a means of what? Of negating the very essence, part of the essence of religion, which is regulation of the physical. Like a man comes to Sayyidina Junayd al-Baghdadi rahimahullah ta'ala, and he says to Sayyidina Junayd that an individual, he claims that the Sharia, Yahweh Lord, doesn't apply to him anymore. قَدْ وَصَلْ. He says he's wasal, he's arrived at the door of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ماذا تقول? What do you say? Sayyidina Junayd, the Imam of the Ta'ifatain, Imam of the Sharia and the Haqiqah. Sayyidina Junayd radiallahu ta'ala says, نعم قد وصل. He says, yes, he's arrived. وصل إلى السقر. He's arrived at hellfire. That's what he place he's arrived at. Anyone who believes that they become too pure to pray, or they become too pure to fast, or they become too pure to give, or they become too pure to walk onto holy territory, or they become too pure to fight and struggle jihad in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, قَدْ وَصَلْ, that they have arrived, وَصَلَ إِلَى السَّقَرِ, they've arrived at hell. But likewise also the purification of the human mind, and it's not only in terms of aqidah. What do we believe about Allah Jalla Ula? What do we believe about the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the Rasul and the messengers? What do we believe about the book Revelation? What do we believe about the angelic realm? What do we believe about the last day? What about destiny? But it's about how does that reality inform the very way we see the world, the very way we interact with the world, the very relationship that we have with brother and with sister and with man and with woman. That reality, that worldview that the believer must have, the Muhammadan worldview, that regulation of the mind, that you see the way he saw it, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, as Umar ibn al-Khattab, the great one, would say, brothers from the same source. He would say they see the world in the exact same way. That's Ra'iyatul Ula. That is the first generation of Sahaba. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in numerous verses in the Quran praises that generation. Allah Jalla wa'ala has not praised our generation. Why? شَتَّانَ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَهُمْ. Because of the vast disparity between us and them. And we shouldn't look at this at the level of a generation. Just look at yourself better than insan. عَلَى نَفْسِهِ بَصِيرًا. The human being knows himself best. وَلَوْ أَلْقَى مَعَذِيرًا. Even though he offers excuses, we know ourselves best. You see, when we close the doors, we remove the friends, we switched off the light. أَيْنَ أَنْتَ مَعَ اللَّهِ. Where are you with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Where's your heart with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Where's the level of your interaction with those divine commandments that, mashallah, we're in a'yun nas, we're in front of the eyes of human beings, but bi'ayn Allah nadiratun ilayna, but with the eye of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that perpetually gazes upon us, you go amiss. And we know ourselves best. And any one of them Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala warda, regardless of whether you saw them manifest in front of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, or in the depths of their own house, you would find no change inside of their engagement with the Lord of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam, he asked the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam about the great reality of the human being, which is the human spirit, the ruh, the nafs of the human being, the soul of man in and of himself, the third dimension. And this is the most important. Why? Because of our reality. We were spirit before we were anything else. Spirit that descends into the world of intelligence, rationality, that descends into the world of physical. Tustari Abdullah, Sahab bin Abdullah Tustari, when he asked about the human being as a descent from what the higher realm of spirit, he said, man, what was the human being? He said, he said, human beings suspended inside of intellect, suspended inside of space. I will descend from the spiritual realm to the realm of intelligible before we descend 120 days inside of the wombs of our mothers, and we become physical realities at that point in time, the third and completed facet of the human being. But the point is, you're also is that you're a spirit. So perfect the virtues of the spirit, and the one who perfects the virtues of the spirit will perfect the virtues of the intellect, and by extension will perfect the virtues of the physical likewise. That's just the way it works. Because by virtue of your soul, not by your physical dimension, you are rendered human. That's what the poet said. So we take care of the human soul, and that's what the Prophet said, him. When Allah Ta'ala says inside the Quran, him, that he comes to yuzakki. What will yuzakki? To purify the depths of the human being. The very thing that renders man, the spirit of man. That's the reality, and that reality becomes more important as we progress towards the end of time. Such that it's as if holding on to a piece of cinder that is no longer physical. Even those freaks, those people who can walk on fire and what have you. What is that? Mind over matter. That they can negate the reality of their physical dimension due to a higher intellectual, rational reality that they have. Same here, the one who's operating on the level of spirit, it negates everything else. It's very, very different. As we know in multiple chronicles of the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala, when they can undergo the types of pain that are unimaginable by spiritual beings that operate at a very, very different level. Radiallahu ta'ala anhum wa ardahum. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to render us inside of their barakah radiallahu ta'ala anhum. The Prophet ﷺ informed us of the tradition of those people at the end of time who manifest with Sayyidina Isa ibn Maryam at Quds, at Jerusalem. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala liberate the great place with people like Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala inside of this time. And that when the Prophet ﷺ said when there's a hisar, when there's an embargo placed upon them, those people at Quds, in the ranks of the Mahdi al-Muntadir, as hum yantadiruna, the Hur Isa ibn Maryam, they await the manifestation of Jesus, son of Mary alayhi salam, that what happens? They have no food whatsoever. How are you going to live, O physical being, without your food? How are you going to live without roti? How are you going to live without dal, burgers, chips, chicken, whatever? How are you going to live? Yeah, you saw how difficult it was in Ramadan, and that was through choice. This is strict of choice. You have the one-eyed beast, the Dajjal on your doorstep surrounding you inside of Jerusalem. And nowhere to run to, nowhere to hide, no food whatsoever. Except that these are different types of beings. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ says, food to whom? Their food, yawmaidin, on that day, dhikrullah. The remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Dhikr qut al-qulub. That dhikr is the sustenance of the spirit, of the soul in and of itself. And that's why the angelic realm that are 100% spirit souls, Gabriel, Mikael, Azrael, Israfil, all they consume is the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in Sahih Muslim, when he mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sayyara, he has these ambassadorial angels, fudala. Fudala means that they have no other occupation inside of the cone, inside of the universe, except one thing. What is that? To scour the universe looking for the circles of Allah Ta'ala's remembrance. That's all they do, scour. And from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's remembrance circles is this, in which we're in. For us, physical beings, all I can see is Ahmed, Muhammad, and Junaid, and that's all I can see. You see, beings of spirit, they may see beings of spirit. Beings of physical, that's all they may see. The presence of them, that's hadith in Sahih Muslim. Why? Because that's their qut. That is their sustenance, to hear the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, name of Allah Jalla Fi'ula mentioned. This is deen, these three things. And what we would do, hold on to in an age which no doubt whatsoever is a radical age. And no matter what your criterion is for trying to adjudicate the age in which we live in, when ages are gone, this is an age of deep radicalism at every single level. And we should understand that never does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow radicalism, the world of duality, to manifest at one level inside the world of manifestation, the world of kufr, except that also we're going to see radicalism manifest inside the world of belief. And that's the words of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He said, on that day, fustatan. On that day, two camps. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, end of time scenario. He said, Iman la nifaqa fi. He said, faith that is not tainted by hypocrisy, wal kufr la iman fi. And disbelief that is not, quote unquote, tainted by faith. The Prophet ﷺ said, what is required of each and every single one of us is to be of those who are people of preparation, that we prepare for the age in which we live in, that we become Ahl Islam, haqiqatan, people of Islam in the truest sense. We don't just wait for the signs, as many of them manifest. Look at Sayyidina Zurayd, when he one of the things he made mention of, that when the minarets of mosques are built high, they have high minarets in mosques, sign at the end of time. He says when the Mushaf is adorned, Fadlatul Masahif, he said, when the Mushaf is adorned, sign of end of time. He said, radiallahu ta'ala, Zakharif al-Masajid, when the Masajid, people spending 60 million pounds on building a mosque. How much? The masjid of the Messenger of Allah, the greatest masjid ever built. How much did that cost? Where's the Dustur? Where's the criterion? Where's the Furqan? Where is it? This is things that he made mention of. Shaykidul Mabani. He said when we start building lofty buildings, as likewise the hadith is Sahih Muslim. ينتدب أمة الربة وترى الحفاة العراة العالة لعائشة يتطاولون في البنيان. Where you see naked, destitute, barefoot headsmen competing in the construction of skyscrapers. The Prophet ﷺ said, signs at the end of time. And who fatin? The one who's intelligent, in the lillahi ibadun futala, Imam Shafi'i said, that verily Allah has intelligent servants. The one who's intelligent, he reads signs and he acts in accordance with those signs. And the one who is beyond intelligence, he prepares for the signs. Why? Because they manifest from la yakhruj min hada ila al-haq. They manifest from a mouth that only manifests and speaks the truth. Sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. The point is that the age in which we live in, that deen is your deen. Deenakum, deenakum. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, your deen, your deen. Your deen, your deen. And he said that al-hadar, mansub al-hadar, means be careful of your deen, take care of your deen, take care of your deen. Many things you've got to stacked against you. Why? Because one of the natures of religion is that you need an environment, conducive environment, in order to maintain spirituality, rationality, physicality. You need environment to help promote that in deen. That's the project of Medina, the project of the Prophet ﷺ. When you came into a bastion of kufr, you came into a place that is about building kuffar, not about building Ahl Iman. Point blank. Sorry for speaking the truth. Not a popularity contest. But that's the reality where we've all entered into here. Okay, inside of these universities, and that's why things like the ISOC, those Islamic sort of societies, are extremely important inside the life of any single Muslim inside of these bastions of disbelief. They're not about sending you to Allah Ta'ala. If you want to watch something playing, they're not sending you to hell. That's what they're about. So hadar, be careful of your religion. Be careful of that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from you. Obedience, physically, rationally, spiritually. Allah didn't create you haqqab li jahannam. He didn't create you as wood for fire. That's not why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you. But Allah ta'ala created you li ibadatihi jalla jalaluh. Allah ta'ala created you for His worship. And Allah Ta'ala prepared prepared for those conscious people at every single level a place. In al-Bukhari, مِمَّا لَا عَيْنٌ رَأَتْ, no eye has seen, وَلَا أُذُنٌ سَمِعَتْ, no ear has heard, وَلَا خَطَرَ عَلَى قَلْبِ بَشَرٍ, and it's never occurred to the heart of human beings. You want to take the Jannah of this life that the Dajjal offers? You want to take the Jannah that is eternal, that that comes forth from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah ta'ala for tawfiq, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for love, for the gates. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sallam.
Does anyone have any questions to ask the Shaykh? Anyone want to pass any? Is there any coming up? No. Any questions?
So I just wanted to ask, I'm curious because you said that relationships between men and other men and women and other women are foul unions, and why do you believe that, and how, if they are indeed foul unions, how would you want to correct them, if at all?
Any others? We'll do a few at a time. Not everyone at once. They're all thinking.
Hi, so you talk about correcting your own deen and also showing the deen and the haqq to other people. Do you propose that the best way to do that is to first correct yourself and let it manifest in your actions in terms of integrity and honesty, and then that as a major means of we see demonstrating the attributes of a good Muslim, as well as active dawah as well?
Anyone else?
Assalamu alaikum, brother. Jazakallah khair. I'm just asking, for example, we all find ourselves in this country or a place where we are surrounded by so many evil things. So how do we kind of bolster up our fragile faith, kind of strengthen our faith in this country? What are things?
Repeat it again, sorry.
Yeah, how do we bolster up our fragile faith, kind of to strengthen our faith?
Anyone else?
I just want to ask about the Ihsan. You talked about the Islam, Iman and Ihsan, which is the spirituality aspect. There are some certain groups like the Sufis who tend to dwell on the Ihsan aspect. Their practices, is it in line with the Quran and Sunnah? And if that is so, shall we imitate and emulate this kind of people? And if not, what shall we do on our own end to actually uplift our spirit and ensure that we attain Ihsan?
As it relates to the first question, which relates to the issue like of homosexuality, well, I mean, that is something which, again, the laws of the prophets themselves, and the prophets, regardless of whatever tradition somebody adheres to, religious tradition, that is something all religious traditions have concurred upon. And it's something even non-religious traditions, non-religious societies, up until very recently, have also sort of concurred upon. What we're speaking about is what we call shudud, the disfigurement of a man finding sexual solace inside of another man, and likewise as it also relates
to a woman. So here this is not like widely sort of I think. This is just here just the regurgitation, for want of a better phrase, of the laws and the teachings of the prophets themselves without exception. But at the same time is that what we see as religiously inside of Islam, that it's a sexual perversion that a man may be subject to for multiple reasons, and especially inside of the age of physical disfigurement. There can be physical reasons why a person inclines towards somebody of the same sex. And so we're not getting into the reasons why that disposition of somebody, but ultimately the Lord of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees it as a disfigurement, But no, it's a disfigurement at the level of the law. It's not a disfigurement at the level of faith unless somebody sanctions it as something which is legal. Point being is that somebody who has homosexual tendencies, practices, and somebody who's may call himself a red-blooded male, likes women, but likes women outside of the depths of the Lord. There's a disfigurement in both types, disfigurement in both, although one is more severe than the other, but there's a disfigurement in both. And just in the same way, zina, adultery or fornication, not something that removes faith ultimately from the heart of a human being, neither does homosexuality either. That we make state. That's what we sort of state in that regard. Okay? In this sort of land, how do we propose to get rid of it? That's not necessarily our mandate. Our mandate here is not necessarily how do we get rid of homosexuality. The mandate from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is how do you bring people into faith? How do you bring people into the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That's the mandate. And as for those other issues, those issues that will be taken care of, tilqa'iyya, the issues that will be resolved when people become people of faith. But it requires submission to the law, ultimately submission to the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what we would say about the first question. As for the second question, which related to faith and the security of our faith inside of these lands, what was your question?
The question was, in order to, you say you correct the deen, correct your...
Yeah, should we manifest it in ourselves first before others, or
as well as spreading the deen, but the principal way of my question is the principal way through correcting yourself and letting the deen and its correct attributes manifest in your actions?
The way of rectification of the self is in accordance with the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ. He says that which rectified the first will rectify the last. The methodology doesn't change. So this sort of idea that some people have that we have to sort of rectify the self before we can rectify the others in a very sort of literal sense, that's erroneous, because that was not the teachings of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. Ultimately, it's the rectification of the other, of the brother, of the mother, of the sister. It's that rectification, that self-rectification is ultimately attained also. It's a combination of both. Religion as a private sphere and as a public sphere. And the human being, the Prophet ﷺ says, I will convey on my behalf even one verse, i.e. from the get-go. You have to be somebody who's engaging in society, and especially inside of our age, in the tradition, in Islam Islam began as a strange thing, and then once again it changed to being a strange thing. But tuba lil-ghuraba, so glad tidings to the strangers, and then they ask, men al-ghuraba. That's the Prophet. Men al-ghuraba, who or what are the ghuraba, the strangers? He said, men alladhina yuslihun al-nas, those who rectify humanity, ba'da and fasad, after they've been corrupted. So the rectification. Okay, so especially when say'udu qariba, in times where Islam is strange, deen is strange. You see, and it's as if, you see, like the question which relates to homosexuality, it's as if it's only Muslims who speak out against homosexuality, as if Christians don't, as if the Jews don't, and the religions speak out against it, but many have fell silent. And as the Prophet ﷺ said to Tibi'una, that you will follow those who went before you, shibran bi shibr, dhira'an bi dhira', handspan by handspan, arms length by arms length. The Prophet ﷺ said, men whom? They asked, who are they, O Messenger of Allah? Al-Yahud wa Nasara, the Jews and the Christians. He said, the men. Who else are we speaking about? That when religious people fall silent, then corruption ensues. And that's why Amr bil Ma'ruf Nahi anil Munkar, as the Prophet ﷺ said, the means by which chastisement falls upon the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ is that we do not command the good and not forbid the evil. Okay? And we place our own preferences aside, and we place our own opinions aside. We place all of that nonsense. It's nonsense, lies. Bunch of liars talk about freedom of speech and what have you. If it's a freedom of speech, give me the freedom for inkar. Give me the freedom to speak out against. You're speaking out against. And open up the sphere, marhaba, open up the sphere, and let those who are closest to God win. And then let's open it up. Allahu Akbar. Third question, what was it? Remind me, please.
About the ihsan.
What was the third question? Yours before.
About how to bolster up fight your faith, strengthen your faith.
You strengthen your faith through people of faith, ultimately. That's really key, as we mentioned about the environment. Your faith is strengthened by people of faith, Okay? So you've got to try and keep good company. The Prophet ﷺ in Bukhari and Muslim, he said, "Al-mar'u ala deen khalilihi." A human being is upon the religion of his intimate friend. Full stop. Kalam sadiq al-masluk. That's the words of the truthful one, ﷺ. Okay? And nafsul nafs tesri. Yani the spirit of man, tesri. Move swiftly to the spirit of man. You understand it? We all have a vibe. Like Dr. Bach, there's a doctor called Dr. Bach. He believes that, in the plants, you have a vibe. So he collects the vibe of plants, and the vibe, not the plants, the vibe of a plant, and he makes it into a medicine. That's taught in universities. Dr. Bach, it's a tributary of homeopathy. The plants have a vibe, and what about human beings? Don't we have a vibe? So we've got to begin to collect the vibes of superior, supreme plants that are known as men and women, great men and great women, and be inside of their vibe, be inside of their aura. That's of critical importance. You be with good people, you become good. Look at the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum warda. A moment inside of the presence of prophecy, transformed. And he transformed. And he just walk inside of Medina, end of the Medini period. They could be transformed immediately because of the vibe of prophecy. Okay? Now we've got to try and find vibes, and there are different types of vibes. Okay? We've got to try and find some good vibes, some good people, good folk. And that's important. But as the Prophet ﷺ said, you can't always be with good people who have good vibes. So he said, be conscious of God wherever you may be. Be a person of taqwa wherever you may be. And how do you become a person of taqwa? Dhikrullah. That's the last covenant in the hadith in Ahmad saying Mu'adh ibn Jabal. The last covenant I took from the Prophet saying Mu'adh ibn Jabal said, La yazal lisanuka ratban bi dhikrillah ya Mu'adh. Always make your tongue moist in the remembrance of Allah, O Mu'adh. That's the last compact, the last covenant. The great Mu'adh ibn Jabal, the great Imam of the Lord of the Sahaba took from the Prophet himself. And they say, Al-awliya idha dhukiru hadar. Awliya, that when they're mentioned, they come present. فَكَيْفَ بِاللَّهِ. How about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Mawlana? How about Allah Jalla ta'ala? Keep your tongue moist in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everywhere you are, everywhere. When you enter a place, when you exit a place, when you're in the midst of a place, keep your tongue moist in the remembrance of Allah ta'ala. Look at the Siddiq al-Akbar, Abu Bakr al-Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala. Even when he went into the bathroom, his impulse was to remember Allah ta'ala. He had to put rocks in his mouth. Abu Bakr, to stop his tongue moving in the remembrance of Allah Jalla wa'ala. That's the faith. You're human. The Prophet said, you're going to sin. Human beings, we sin by nature, but just get up, dust yourself off. Be a true champion. Champions are determined by what they do after a defeat. That's true champions. So after you have been defeated by your own acts, get up and dust yourself off, move back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with obedience in tawbah, full stop. وَخَالَقَ النَّاسِ بِخُلُقٍ حَسَنٍ. Just treat people well. And the way the Prophet said, خَالَقَ النَّاسِ بِخُلُقٍ حَسَنٍ, it's about the Khalil, your company. He said, literally in Arabic, bring the good character out of people through your good character towards them. Because that's for your own benefit. If you're surrounded by people who have good attributes, good mannerisms, it only benefits you. Okay? So that's the reality. Become a person of tilawatul Quran, and his day shouldn't go by except that you recite the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The words of my Lord, the words of my Lord. A day shouldn't go by except that there's some type of attachment, literal attachment to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I mean, we had teachers who used to tell us, a day goes by, you don't see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's a day of weakness of faith. You don't see him in a dream state or happy. We had teachers who stated that reality. Yeah, we're not asking about seeing him, that's not reading him in a book. That's what we're asking about, opening up a book. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. If you're with his words, it's as if you're with him. That's Sahaba. When they heard him, they were with the Prophet ﷺ. Be with him through his words. Be with him through his description. Be with him through salawat alayhi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. These things, important realities. Important realities. But all that, tilawatul Quran, dhikr Rasul, good mannerisms, issues of Tawbah, you'll find that with a blessed being. If you have a blessed friend, you'll find them, time for Quran, they recite Quran. Time for dhikr Allah, dhikr Allah. Salawat, 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 salawat. You'll find them, and then thereby you imitate human beings by their nature. We imitate. Okay? The last one about ihsan, the issue of ihsan. One of the problems that we have as Muslims today is words, like this word Sufi. We mentioned the word Sufi and we said that, khalas, write on a piece of paper what the word Sufi means. It's going to be just going to find like the sort of opposite descriptions of the word Sufi. Some of them good and some of them just terrible. Terrible. What's the problem with the word? And why does a word render us all problematic? We're not interested necessarily in words, that's what our ulama say, but we're interested in realities behind terms. As a criterion, and we want to be intelligent people, as a criterion, if we're going to say the Sufism is wrong because of Sufis or some Sufis, then we'll also say Kalam, theology is wrong because of some theologians, and we'll say the law, Islam is wrong because of Muslims. Throw it all out. Baby, bath water, the bathtub, everything, throw it all out. That's what I say. That's somebody who's a bit daft. So you move beyond the terms and you look at realities. Ihsan, tasawwuf, tazkiyah, whatever word you call it, is not only part of the deen, it is the deen. Full stop. It's the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what the prophets taught. Prophets teach the purification of the human soul. Every prophet. And as we come towards the end of time, when the great prophet Jesus returns, he is radical upon the purification of the human spirit. It's as if he doesn't have a physical dimension. And part of his return is just to complete that aspect of his bashariyah, of his human reality. And we move towards a very, very spiritual age. And those people who are at war with a physical term, like the term Sufi, they will find themselves in the army of physical people called the Antichrist. That's where they'll find themselves, in that type of army. Because there's two types of army face themselves off. So we have to be careful. And because our tradition is very clear, as the Prophet ﷺ said, you have a problem with Sufism, you have a problem with Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah has an entire volume 35 of his fatwa called Sufism. You have a problem with Sufism, you have a problem with Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, multiple works about Sufism with the literal term. You have a problem with Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali. You have a problem with the ulama of the Shafi'i school, the Maliki school, the Hanafi school, and the Hanbali school. You have a problem with Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. You even have a problem with the Shia. You have a problem with everyone, so. Okay, so we got to get intelligent about this matter. Got to get intelligent, really intelligent. We're not interested in changing if people do things that are wrong. Like Imam Zhain Ibrahim Osi, he says, our affair, we have two witnesses. It means Sufism, if you want the term. We have two witnesses, Kitab or Sunnah. That's what, we have two witnesses for every single act that we do. So if people do practices that are not from deen in the name of Sufism, then there's something wrong with the practice, but we have mercy with those who do it. We embrace them in the way we embrace any people who have strayed from the path of the Prophet himself, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But deen is deen. It doesn't need my man to clarify it in the 15th century, a whole century, to clarify what deen is, attached to the transmission. Right.
We are told Allah chooses who He wills, guides who He wills, chooses you to be in certain places, etc. Some people will say, why are certain people chosen? And there's this. How do you answer this? So, like, if someone says, why do some people get chosen and not others?
The question, Islam, it's not necessarily that Allah chooses people, although clearly He does. There's traditions that relate to that. along in Ahmed and others, of the example, the prophets themselves are chosen from amongst their people. Those who surround the Prophet Sallallahu the Muslim of Ahmed, the Sahaba as an example, they were chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are chosen people. But ultimately they're chosen because they chose. I think that's the greater theme here. The greater theme in the world of experience for us, that we have to be people who choose Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's message in order to be chosen. I think that's more so the way we should gaze at the point.
Next question is from a sister who's quite interested in Islam. She says that the only thing holding her back now is a few issues to do with women. She says that there's a lot of, throughout the history, Islam has been dominated by male scholars. Has this distorted Islam because there haven't been enough female scholars to put their view on Islam forward? And has it become a male-dominated religion?
I think there's been a lot of, to answer that question, that there's no doubt there has been a lot of male scholars, and no doubt that the voice in terms of Islam, the voice on the minbar, the actual pulpit, or the voice as a manifest inside of the works of the ulama, has predominantly been a male voice. But that does not mean that there's not a female voice whatsoever. As you know, many of the great scholars of Islam, that their teachers were women. And as we know about transmission, nature of transmission, is that students have integrity in representing the words of their teachers, literally the words of their teachers. So no doubt the voice of women is represented through the voice of men, if you look at it in terms of literature or at the pulpit in and of itself. But in terms of the sphere of actual tadris, when we went to sphere, because if it's just about the pulpit, one, or it's just about books, two, then we miss the essence of the religion in and of itself. The essence of the religion is about an interaction between student and teacher inside of these halaq of dhikr, these circles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's remembrance. And no doubt once you step inside of the halaq of dhikr, you'll find women at the center circle. That's historically been the case inside of Islam, and it's as if you're going to struggle to find any of the great imams of religion, except that they have not one or two or 10, but hundreds of teachers who were women in and of themselves. That is our tradition. But our tradition is لِكُلِّ دِينٍ خُلُقٍ وَخُلُقَ الْإِسْلَامِ الْحَيَاةِ. The Prophet ﷺ said every manifestation of the eternal religion has an innate characteristic, and the innate characteristic of Islam is modesty. And that modesty finds itself more emphatically inside of women than it does men. And so our tradition, women themselves, out of preference for themselves, they prefer scholars to manifest that modesty and stay behind the veil in and of itself, and that's their choice and their preference. But what we do not believe whatsoever that it's distorted the teachings of the prophets themselves, because you could ultimately take that argument and back to the prophets, right back to the prophets, and say, well, the prophets were men. So is that a patriarchal understanding of God's divine law? Is the prophets themselves were men? No. So we believe that he lay unto the Prophet doesn't speak of his own desire, and likewise those who are purified inside of the sphere of prophecy, they don't speak of their own desire, and they fear God too much to impose their nafs upon the teachings of the divine.
The next question is about hadra. Some people participate in this dhikr called hadra. Is there any proof on this, for this evidence?
What you mean by hadra? Hadra has multiple significations, it has multiple meanings. Hadra literally means presence. So hadra is about being present with God. As we said, either vukiru hadaru hadra. When they're mentioned, they become present. So hadra is about presence with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there are multiple manifestations of hadra. The tradition that we took from the sayings of Hadramaut, they have a hadra. And their hadra is to sit still, listening to what? To spiritual poetry. You don't move whatsoever, you're just listening. So I'm sure that's not what people mean by hadra. And people mean by hadra, as one of them said, disco lila, isn't it? Some type of sort of movement. That's what we mean by hadra. Those who do that, I think they're better qualified to speak about it. As we learn from our teachers, not what I took from my teachers, so I'm not qualified to speak about the actual understandings of Islam and the spiritual path that others adhere to. Let's just ask that question to them.
Next question is, what is the significance of different planets in the star system Islamically? Why are they there? What is their purpose? Planets in the star system.
In the solar system. And Allah Ta'ala alam, and the planet, and what's their purpose. And the Prophet Sallallahu he informed us in Abu Dawood, in Islam from the good of somebody's Islam, he leaves alone that which doesn't concern him. What's your business with the next planet? You have no business with it. You're going to go there. You're going to go there, khalas. Like somebody's going to go to, where are we, Mecca, Medina, Jerusalem, wherever you're going to go to, you have business knowing about the place you're going to go to. Seeing that you're not going to Mars, you're not going. Khalas, let it be. Although some of the ulama said the least purpose, one of them said the least purpose of the lahbat al-malaika, they were abodes of the angels. That's mentioned inside of the book. I said not about business, it's just how